All right, we're going to call the meeting, part-time meeting for City Council. This is our regular meeting. We're here, Chad. We're here at the Murfreesboro Municipal Airport in the Business Center. If you'll bow with me, we'll say our prayer and do have our pledge. Father, I thank you for this time that we get to spend together. Lord, for the blessings that you've provided Murfreesboro. Lord, I just pray that the decisions that you make, or the decisions you give us today, will be those that will be fitting to you. Lord, pray for what's happening in the country. We pray for Ukraine. We pray for all those that are having to make decisions that are much wider than what we make here in Murfreesboro, that you give them wisdom, that you give them direction, and most of all, that you give them guidance. We love you and we praise you. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. You've got your agenda in front of you. We have 4 action items, and then we'll get into our workshop items. Old Fort Golf Course, this is a renovation agreement. Trey, are you going to present this? All right.
Good morning, Mayor and members of City Council. Today I'm asking for the approval of a contract with Watermark Golf and Nathan Crace Design. This is for a comprehensive bunker study, greens renovation of Old Fort Golf Course. The anticipated cost of the design service is $54,000 plus travel expenses, which would just be reimbursed by the IRS per diem rates. This would be paid for with 2021 CIP bond proceeds. That was initially, this was initially kind of allocated for driving range netting. Once we kind of got a consultant in place for that, got design of the driving range, realized that, there was initially $350,000 for that. Once we got the design back, we realized it was about a $2.5 million project, which kind of spurred us on to try to figure out maybe a different and a better way to use that funding. So that's what we're asking for today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Trey? Trey, is this something y'all have to do every so many years?
Yeah, the lifespan of the greens, depending on a number of factors, is anywhere from 15 to possibly 30 years. Next year, based on his plan, if we do the greens renovation project next year, that would be year 20 for those greens. In the last few years, they've started to show some signs, where it's getting close to time to need to do that.
Will the bunker renovation and the green resurfacing happen at the same time? Is that?
It would happen in the same year, so he's proposing that we would start the bunker renovation project in the winter of January 2023. It would not affect play. We wouldn't have to shut down for that. It would take a couple months. They would also maybe address some drainage work. Some of the design work he would do, and some of it may be done in-house by our staff, our maintenance staff. But that would not cause the course to shut down. However, we would lead into then the resurfacing of the greens, which would. So it would take place over, maybe 6 months, but would be shut down for approximately 3. And it does kind of split fiscal years next year, I guess, when all that would take place.
No other questions? I move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Please call the roll.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet? Mr. Wade? Mr. Wright? Mayor McFarland?
All right, we'll move to the Chlortec hypochlorite cell replacement.
Mayor, Council, thank you for the opportunity to come before you. Got 3 action items. The first one being a replacement of our Chlortec cell. It's our on-site bleach generation for disinfection at the water plant. We did just have one of our inventoried cells used for a replacement. This is a sole source purchase in the amount of $53,297, and it's to replace that cell as a backup in case we lose another one. So we'd ask for your approval for that purchase.
Any questions for Darren?
Second.
Motion is second.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet? Mr. Wade? Mr. Wright?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
All right, we'll move to the Overall Creek Pump Station Expansion Award of the contract.
Yes, sir. Thank you again, Mayor. This is the Overall Creek Pump Station expansion. We took bids in February. We do have the pump station and force main upgrade estimated at $12.7 million. In essence, we're just mirroring the existing pump station and doubling the size of the capacity of that station. We did have bids come in for just the pump station bid. We haven't bid the force main yet, but it came in at $4.96 million, which was 20% over our estimate, which was $4.12 million. We had 4 bidders, and we're recommending the award to Blakely Construction Services. I'm available for questions if you have any.
Darren, is this part of what we were talking about on the whole Salem Road basin and expanding that? Is that?
No, it's not, but it's part of everything west of the interstate. Our high growth area does feed to this pump station. So this does, from our sewer allocation and capacity analysis, this gives us the necessary, extends that capacity on the west side of the interstate substantially. So
It's a totally separate
it's separate, yes,
thing as opposed to that $8 million or whatever we're talking about for that one basin.
correct.
Questions, I'll move for approval.
Second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris? Yes. Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Wade?
Aye.
Mr. Wright?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. All right, we'll move to the Switchgear Improvements, and this is a bid award as well. Darren?
Sir, this is our switchgear replacement at our water treatment plant, amount of $1.5 million. This is a 30-year-old switchgear, obsolete parts. It was just time to replace the breakers and these primary and secondary disconnects. We had 2 bidders. Our estimate was $1.37 million, so we did have our bid come in about 10% over the estimate. But we had 2 bidders, and so we're recommending the award to PowerTech LLC. And again, I'm available for questions if you have any.
Are you seeing it pretty consistent that most of our bids are coming over?
Yes, sir. We've gone back to all of our engineering firms and said, give me a more recent, that Overall Creek estimate was done the month before we took the bid, and the bid came in 20% over the estimate.
Let me ask a question, just a general knowledge thing. This is not specific to this.
Okay.
Might be helpful is, given the volatility of the economy now, how firm are these bids that we're getting? Or how much wiggle room do they have, do we have? Will we see some type of adjustment or
Well, these are
firm?
bids, and it's not to say, we try to be sensitive to if we do change scope or if there's an unforeseen, let's just say at the pump station, there's an unforeseen geotechnical condition, we hit a sinkhole or we hit an underground well, and there's some extra bypass pumping to dewater the pit that the pump station's being constructed in. You want to have common sense and understand there may be situations that occur that it was just unforeseen. It's justified extra cost. So we always work with contractors in that regard, but if everything goes smooth, we expect them to hold their bid to what they gave us. Now, I'll say if, the ductile iron pipe, let's say ductile iron pipe has a 30% increase before they order it, do we pay that adjusted price or not? I think if they document it, I think it's something we need to potentially consider. again, if they didn't see it coming, it's hard for me to be too harsh, but I've been known to be kind of harsh too.
Does changes like that, would they come back as a change order or something?
Come back, it would come before the council. We would bring it back to your attention and ask you to vote on it.
Any more questions for Mr. Gore?
No questions, I move for approval.
Motion is second.
Mayor Skels Harris. Aye. Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mr. Wright. Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. All right, we're going to move to our workshop items. Number 5, golf part-time staff reduction.
I'll take this and the next one as well. In our review on part-time staffing and the labor market that we have right now, it's almost impossible to secure quite a few positions. And outlined in the materials that were sent to you is moving from part-time positions to quite a bit less full-time positions. Generally, between the two departments, it's about a $2,000 change, so we'll just come back later to do a budget adjustment on the head count at a later time. But for information purposes, and if you had any questions, we wanted to let you know that we're trying to shift. We're continuing to look at the wages that we need to put out there in the market for hiring part-time and seasonal staff. So it's an ongoing effort, but this is one that allows us to go out and secure some full-time people to take several part-time positions out.
We need a motion on this?
No, it's just kind of information. If you have any questions, we can certainly answer those.
If we're going to increase the full-time head count, we would need council to approve that.
Oh, I thought we'd bring back a little budget, those minor budget amendments but we can make a motion, certainly.
Okay.
We accept your motion.
David?
Anybody's got any questions?
And this is for golf and for Parks and Rec?
Yeah, both.
Good, Rick? Yep, I'll make a motion, we head that direction. Second. On both. Yep, second.
So heading that direction is a motion for approval, right?
Well, head the direction of changing it, yeah, whatever.
It'd be a motion to change the head count.
I mean, I just want to make sure we put that in the record that,
We're heading that direction.
hey, that's right. He's been watching Yellowstone, so that's what it is.
Watch that, even though I want to be ripped just like everybody else does.
I know.
I'd already have you at the bottom of the pit by now.
It's at the train station, by the way.
Whatever.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a motion to approve and to head that direction. Ms. Brown, if you'll call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris. Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mr. Wright. Mayor McFarland.
And now we'll move from talking about the train station at the bottom of a pit to the Evergreen Cemetery. That's administration.
This is transfer Evergreen Cemetery. We've talked about this actually for several years now, the need to transition away from the city's very tenuous connection to the Evergreen Cemetery and to allow the Evergreen Cemetery to operate as its own LLC. It took some time to get that all put together. They've now secured licensing from the state, and so it would transfer title to the property, although it really clears up title of the property because it was attempted in the 40s, 1949, to transfer title. Unfortunately, a transfer title to an entity that really didn't exist from a legal standpoint, and so it's operated in that fashion for quite some time. But this action will clear up its. The bill of sale will clear up the title and turn it over to the LLC. They're appropriately licensed now to run the cemetery. They've been running it in the past. The city really doesn't have any oversight or any connection to it other than every year they bring a budget, and then there are part of our audit, which hasn't been that great for the last couple of years. And so that'll end that kind of need to do those type of things. Any questions?
Are they going to have like a board of directors or something, or how, is that how it's?
They have an LLC, so usually with an LLC, you have a management agreement, and the management agreement will dictate how the management structure is done. I would assume that the executive committee that runs the cemetery now will continue to make those decisions.
If no questions, I move for approval.
Motion is second. Ms. Brown, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Tacklet. Mr. Wade. Mr. Wright. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll move to item 8. We have the waste away, waste to fuel report update.
Mayor, again, thank you, council. Got a couple of representatives here from Waste Away, Mr. Mike Webb, Mr. Mark Brown. Mr. Brown will come up here shortly to kind of give an update. I'm just kicking this off. We also have Mr. Greg Young, Deputy Commissioner with TDEC here today. Had a good discussion at lunch about this technology. So I'm going to start it off with a video. It's, I don't know if it's, what is it, 2.5, 3 minutes? And then we'll start, we've got a little bit of a PowerPoint. And Mr. Brown will come up, I'll finish up, and then we'll open it up for questions. But if you have questions in the middle of the presentation, or, you know, be glad to discuss.
Mark Brown, and I'm the CEO of Waste Away. Our primary mission is to help end our country's dependence on landfills. And at Waste Away, we can divert 90% of the municipal solid waste away from landfills and into beneficial reuse. We do that through our patented Waste Away technology, which takes solid waste, we pull out the recyclable materials, the metals are pulled out, some of the plastics are pulled out, and then 70% of the end product is our SE3, which is a clean, sustainable fuel that's been approved by EPA for use in non-waste facilities.
I started in RDF, which is refuse-derived fuel, but RDF is just kind of garbage. Garbage in, garbage out, literally. What Waste Away does is change the substance. They go from shredded garbage to fuel. What comes out of Waste Away is extremely stable, pathogen-free, consistent in size, color, BTU, every day. No matter what comes to the plant, the fuel is always the same coming out of the back end. Anybody can make RDF. Waste Away makes fuel.
In combustion terms, it's very similar to coal. In fact, power plants or other coal users can generally introduce this fuel without any changes to their boiler or their power plant or their other combustion equipment. We've tested in cement kilns, we've tested in large power plants, small boilers, gasifiers, and the tests have all been extremely positive. All of the customers have been thrilled with the results they got, and we have multiple national and international companies today that are clamoring to buy fuel.
It actually has been tested and accepted by EPA as a drop-in fuel for coal and biomass. The permitting is not the same as a garbage plant. So you could take this material with a much simpler permitting.
The fuel can be stored and it will not degrade in any way. There will not be any emissions from the pile of fuel.
The fuel that we produce is always the same moisture content. It's always the same BTU. Once you set your settings up to burn, those settings are the ones you run. So they can meet their goals of carbon without having to make constant adjustments to their firing system to accommodate fuel that's never consistent. Set it and forget it.
And when they displace coal with our fuel, they dramatically lower their carbon footprint.
When you take Waste Away fuel and put it into a coal-fired power plant, you actually have a negative carbon emission.
I'm an environmental policy and environmental health professional. Heat, ozone, wildfires, what we're breathing is becoming very real and very visceral for a lot of people. We've seen wholesale change in industry and electricity production, not quite as fast as we need. I conducted a preliminary scoping study. The fuel created by Waste Away, the SE3 or the fluff, it's technologically feasible, it has green outcomes, and it has profit. Very clear benefits, a win-win-win.
We're very proud that we have a high-quality fuel that our customers want.
They don't say they want that waste. They don't want that RDF. They want fuel.
For a Waste Away project to work, it has to be financially feasible for all parties involved. The waste provider needs to save money. The fuel buyer needs to save money. The owner-operator needs a fair return on their investment. independent of any government subsidies. Those are icing on the cake, but that's not what we want to base our projects on. Recycling is part of the answer. It's an important part of the answer. But ultimately, there is always going to be some waste that's destined for the landfill, and that is the waste that we responsibly reprocess, and we find homes and beneficial reuse for 90% of that material. Everyone benefits by eliminating the need for landfills and by reducing our carbon footprints. We all know that these are ticking time bombs. They leave an incredible environmental problem for our children and grandchildren. Someday, someone's going to make them dig that stuff back up and do something with it.
All right. I heard somebody say it's too good to be true. I agree. So, the beginning of the end for landfills. This is what we contracted with Waste Away to go through and develop the business case, right, or the business model, where we can find a fuel buyer. So really, this interim report status update is kind of trying to reinforce that win-win-win opportunity. The solid waste fuel generation, the environmental impact, and the recycling and diversion metrics. Also, again, identifying those potential fuel buyers and providing a financial model that demonstrates project viability. So I'm going to hand it over to Mark and let him kind of go through the next few slides and kind of give you an update of where they are on with discussions on with TVA and some other buyers, potential buyers.
Thank you, Darren. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today and give you an update on our efforts today. And let me just start, open up with some questions. Obviously, you saw me on the video saying a lot of things about Waste Away and what we do. This is not my first presentation to most of you. I recognize a lot of faces in this group, but are there questions on what Waste Away does? I heard a comment from the back row right behind me that it's too good to be true, and it does seem that way sometimes. So
historic observation.
Absolutely. Not seeing any questions. Well, let's move along then. And like somebody said earlier, stop me anytime during this presentation. If questions come to mind, just stop me and I'll be glad to try to answer those for you. Numbers are important in any kind of business project you're entering into. And so real quick, some of the numbers we always focus on: 90% landfill diversion. Now, we're not going to say that we can take care of absolutely everything. There will be some small amount of stuff that still needs to go to a landfill, but 90% of the material currently going to the landfill can be beneficially reused. 100% of food waste processing. That's not as big an issue in Tennessee right now as it is in California and some other states, but it will be coming here, and we are able to handle all of the food waste that may need to be taken care of. 15 years of commercial operation. This is not new technology. It's something that's been in production just down the road in Morrison, Tennessee. Many of you have visited the plant and seen that in person. For those that haven't had that opportunity, let us know. We'll be glad to set up a tour at any time to come down and see the plant in operation. 70% conversion of the raw incoming MSW to fuel. And let me stop and mention that what we're talking about taking into a Waste Away plant is waste directly out of the packer trucks. If you have recycling going on, we don't want to interrupt that in any way. Keep doing the recycling you're doing, but the stuff that's being thrown away and going to the landfills now, we will sort through it, capture any recyclables that have been missed, and then convert 70% of that material into a green fuel that can be used to make green power or for other uses. Typical plant, we're going to see millions of tons of reductions in greenhouse gases and carbon emissions, 0 pathogens or odors, and I know that's a big issue in this community. With the landfill down the street, we're not going to have odors associated with this process. And day one positive project financials. These projects have to make economic sense. Everybody wants to do the right thing for the environment, but if it doesn't make economic sense, it's not going to go anywhere. And as I've already said in the video you just watched, anybody can grind garbage. We manufacture fuel. We are taking as I said, garbage straight out of the garbage trucks, running it through a patented process, and what comes out is fuel in a couple of different forms. This fuel is, I'm not sure what my next slide is. Well, the fuel that we produce can be used in cement kilns, can be used in power plants, can be used in small boilers. We've talked about some of the industries in your community may be able to use these at their boilers for producing steam or power in what we call behind-the-fence applications. One of the important things about our fuel is the EPA Comfort Letter. In 2019, after about 3 years of back and forth with EPA, our fuel was certified as a non-waste material. That's very important for our fuel users because it means that the facilities using this fuel are not waste incinerators. Using this fuel is the same as using wood or coal or other solid fuels. They are not waste incinerators. And as TVA indicated in the letter, it's a drop-in fuel for coal. It's appropriate for units designed to combust coal or wood or biomass. So that's been a very important designation for us. And lots of different ways you can talk about carbon footprints. Having a waste-away plant in the community of the size we're talking about would be the equivalent of taking 36,000 automobiles off of the streets. You can see some of the other numbers there. It's produce enough energy for 20,000 homes. Lots of benefits from a carbon. And by the way, these numbers are not numbers that Waste Away did internally. These are actually third-party numbers from Blue Source, which is one of the nationally recognized certification agencies on these things. And one thing I always talk to communities when we're talking about Waste Away, because we're talking about a 20-year program typically, maybe 30 years, but certainly 20 years starting out. And over 20 years' time, if you're familiar with solid waste and you're familiar with environmental regulations, one thing I can guarantee you is the rules will change. And so one thing about the waste-away system, I call it our Swiss Army knife. It's a very flexible system. We're able to change what we're pulling out as the local markets or the local regulations change. We've got a project in California we're working on right now, and they're very concerned about the rapid changing regulations they deal with out there. We will start out pulling those recyclables for which there is a local market, but if the markets change or if the regulations change, we can quickly adjust this equipment so we're pulling out additional materials that may be needed for other recyclable uses. I really want to get to the report. I think most of, at least the council, are familiar with what the waste-away process is. So let's jump into where we are with our report. And I guess real quickly, the goal of the report, as Darren and I talked about early on when we were talking about this, the goal of this report is to give the council an easy decision to make. It's easy to say we want to do the environmentally right thing. It's easy to say we'd rather not use a landfill, particularly in a community like Murfreesboro where that's such a hot button issue right now. But you've got to have an easy answer to, is it economically viable? And that's the part we're really focusing on right now. Can we give you an easy decision economically to move away from using a landfill and doing something responsible and sustainable with the waste produced here in your community? And I guess an added thing that Darren's been very emphatic about, and the mayor and others as we've talked to them, coming up with a solution for Murfreesboro and perhaps other communities in Rutherford County, but not a solution that requires importing waste into this community. You've been dealing with other counties' garbage for a long time in this community, and it's time to be responsible for your own and let other people deal with their waste as they see fit. A lot of our efforts, we've been working in a lot of different arenas, but probably the biggest thing we've been working on, and unfortunately sometimes the slowest moving piece, is working with TVA. And we had our first high-level meeting, I guess, back in late October with Dr. Joseph Hoagland. He's their VP of Development, and he's actually, his title, I think, is Innovations and something. I forget his exact title, but and working with him, he immediately assigned a team to start looking at the technical analysis for the fuel and how it might be used in some of their existing coal-fired plants. And there has been a lot of information back and forth between the two entities. I guess most recent, we had an 83-page response to some of their financial and fuel questions that was delivered back in late January. Coming out of that work where they're looking at, is it technically feasible, is it economically feasible, is it environmentally beneficial for TVA, we were able to schedule a meeting with Justin Mehrhofer, who's the regional vice president for the northern region, which includes all of Middle Tennessee and southern Kentucky. And he said, he wanted to see it with his own eyes. So in mid-February, a few weeks ago, he came down to the plant, spent half a day with us touring the plant and talking about how this fuel might be integrated into some of their plans. He left very impressed. We had some very positive meetings, and kind of the next step, we're waiting on their technical team to finish that technical analysis. Assuming it comes out positive, which we're confident it will, hopefully we can move forward with TVA. But, I'm not going to make promises there. TVA moves at the speed TVA moves, unfortunately, and there's nothing I can do to change that. But, in addition to TVA, like I said, that's the one we're kind of focused on the most because, quite frankly, that would be one of the easiest decisions for the community. If TVA would make a long-term commitment to take the fuel at a price that makes sense, then it's a very easy decision to enter into a contract to do just that. But we're looking at other options for the fuel. We've been looking at the electric usage and the history for the city water treatment site, looking at other places that the city might be able to produce its own power and use that power and truly have a closed loop scenario where you're producing power and buying your own power, and you're not worried about any third parties that might enter into your business relationship in the future. We've had some good meetings with Middle Tennessee Electric talking about green power distribution, and there are some works, I would say, on TVA's current regulations as to what we can do in distributing power within the community. And right now they are limited to only distributing power within a common substation, and that may be a problem, although we're looking at areas where there are enough large users that we could locate a power plant and do that internally. The real problem there is it's some new regulations, and TVA just hasn't finalized the rules yet. We've worked with the mayor and have some letters being prepared to go out to large power users in the community to talk to them about who might be able to use in what we call a CHP, or combined heat and power plant, where they could use both steam and or power produced. And those would once again be what I mentioned earlier, what we call behind the fence projects, where it's located at a large industrial facility and they make their own green power there. We've met with Pratt Industries and to discuss cooperative involvement. I know they've been talking to the county, I guess it is, about some recycling efforts where they need to collect cardboard for their processes. And as we talked with them, there are a lot of opportunities for the two of us to work together in ways that could benefit the community. We've developed some projected preliminary cost expectations and worked with Darren on those. I think he may have a graph coming up to show you what some of those numbers are looking like. And really, those numbers, while we've got a matrix and a lot of different scenarios we're looking at, until we can really pin down who some of the likely fuel users are, a lot of that is still tied to what those fuel values may be. We do have a regional cement manufacturer that's very interested in buying the fuel that could be produced here, and we're negotiating with them now to see what kind of price and the transport costs that would be involved with that. And so we will keep you posted on that, and that will be coming out some interim reports shortly. And then working with Darren, he had asked us to work up, and we're working on the concept of possibly on an interim basis or maybe even longer term, transporting waste from Murfreesboro to our facility in Morrison, and then probably working with that cement manufacturer as a fuel offtake, looking to see if that might make sense, either as a short-term solution if the landfill were to close too quickly and you needed a short-term solution, or perhaps longer term if that's what's decided. So we're, trying to maximize the benefits from Murfreesboro. Landfill diversion, sustainable power, financial feasibility, environmental impact, and proven technologies. Those are all part of a waste-away project and things we feel are very important for a long-term solution. With that, let me open the floor again for questions.
I've got one.
Okay.
Back on the slide behind this one, so you mentioned something about there were some TVA issues with being able to distribute power. Is that something different? I mean, can a cement manufacturer build their own power and that's all fine? It's a matter of we can't sell it to MTE and have them burn it for electricity to put out through the grid? Is that what the difference of those two are?
That's what the difference is. When we talk about behind the fence, that means a cement plant or auto manufacturer, whoever, can build a power plant on their property, and as long as electricity doesn't cross their property line, they can do anything they want to producing power. But if you're going to do what we call wheeling power, if you're going to produce power and sell it, under the current rules, it has to be green power, which we would qualify as, but it also has to be at a common substation. So currently, TVA will not allow you to, for example, produce power on the west side of the county and sell it on the east side of the county. It has to be at a common substation. Those are new rules, and as Middle Tennessee Electric explained, they think it's probably going to be another year or two before they really have a full understanding of what those rules are going to look like. But their current understanding is it's very limited as to how we could sell that power to other industries in the community. At one point we talked about maybe the county producing the power and letting the school systems use the green power. That would be hard because the schools obviously are all over the county.
But in an area where there was, like in our world, think about a big area that's a heavy industrial planning area or
yes.
zoned area. Mm-hmm. Typically, that would all be under the same substation.
Correct.
Could there be that you build that there's a separate manufacturing plant built, not necessarily behind any of their fences, but among their in their world? And because they're all served by the same substation, they could all buy from that particular plant?
Exactly. As long as everybody's served by the same substation and the power plant is connected to the same substation, you can sell the power that way.
Is that how it would work, for example, with the property that we have on Butler Drive, that our substation? Would the process be that we would take our municipal waste to a certain site, and then either that site would have a waste-away facility, or you would haul that to another plant, or how would that generation work?
You can do it either way. Obviously, if you co-locate the power production and the waste away, one of your large users can be the waste away plant using some of the power that's being produced. But if it works out better to have the waste coming to one location to be processed into fuel and the power plant located somewhere else in the county, then you can break those two apart. So they don't have to be co-located, but a lot of times it works best if they are.
The power plant, you're just going to ship the pellets to the power plant, and they're going to burn that and turn it into electricity, basically?
And that's really what TVA has talked about, being able to use this specifically in Gallatin, is that, or?
Gallatin would obviously be the closest plant, so that would be economically the best plant. And, at this stage, they haven't appointed a plant specifically. Right. They're looking at it with, I think they've got 5 coal plants that they're planning on keeping online longer term, and they are converting a lot of their coal plants now and closing them. But this would, and that's one thing I guess I did not mention from TVA's point of view. If they can capture enough fuel to displace 20%, and now Murfreesboro is not capable of producing that much, but if other communities joined with Murfreesboro and would produce enough fuel for 20% of the fuel needed at, say, Gallatin, for example, they could reduce the carbon footprint of that plant to match a natural gas plant. And so that would enable them to keep that plant open without having to build a new plant. So there's a real financial incentive for TVA to be interested in this. I mean, everybody wants the environmental benefits, but we all understand when you're talking dollars and cents, it has to make economic sense.
Is there some place that you're operating a facility that's to the scale that you're proposing for Murfreesboro and that's functioning to this?
Morrison is the plant we have that's operating now. Some of you have been down there, and the facility here we're talking about would be about 3.5 times the size of Morrison, or 3 times. So it would be a little bit bigger, but it's not like a huge scale up. We do have a project we're hoping to get word on in the next few days in California that will be starting construction once it gets through a permitting phase, but that would be the next project we're looking at building.
Steve, is the relationship between local governments and your company then? What does that look like? What would the relationship between the two? I mean, are we partners, or who's doing what?
That will be part of the report that we'll generate, and what we've worked with Darren on the numbers. We're looking at both numbers. If the city were to own and operate the plant, or if third-party investors own and operate the plant. Obviously, if you have a for-profit plant, it costs a little more on the tip fees to pay for the profit. There's another piece of that in that the city or other municipal entities can borrow money a lot cheaper than on the commercial markets. And so, sometimes there's a hybrid that we call a triple P for a public-private partnership, where maybe the community helps with the financing and then a third party operates, and then your tip fees are somewhere in between. But as we're looking at those numbers, typically if you go all the way from a community-owned facility to a 100% commercial project, it's going to change your tip fees about $20 a ton. So, the closer you get to the community-owned facility, the lower the tip fees are. Quite frankly, most of the projects we are looking at, they start out with going to be commercially financed and owned and operated, and then as the community gets comfortable with the technology and looks at the numbers, California, for example, that's how it started, and as they got into it, they said, well, now wait a minute, there's no real technology risk here. Why would we pay an extra $20 on our tip fee when we could operate this ourselves? So that's typically where it ends up, but doesn't have to.
Is the big question just, will somebody use this? What you're generating, is that pretty much, you got to have somebody that'll use whatever you're generating.
Absolutely. That's the biggest thing we're looking for in this report is what are the opportunities to use the fuel at a price that keeps the tip fees low enough to be, to work for your community.
The two questions I've got, one for the council. We were texting back and forth this morning. It came in through an email to Craig or Brenda at City Hall yesterday, but Mayor Ketron wanted to set a meeting. I think it was pushed again at the Public Works Committee with the municipal mayors. We've got that nailed down. That's going to be March 21st at the courthouse at 6 o'clock. So anyone who wants to come, it's an open meeting if y'all want to listen to what the other municipalities are saying. But you've got Pratt Industries in a cooperative involvement. We haven't talked in some time. I think y'all have worked with Darren. But Pratt, it's my understanding, that's more material that has to be brought in from other places because we don't have enough material countywide to be able to subsidize what Pratt's doing. But my question, and I don't mean this in a negative way towards the county because we're all working together, but why did y'all not make the cut with the county with the RFP process? I mean, y'all are not in that final RFP process, are you, with the county?
Unless you know something I don't, we are.
Okay. Well, I thought y'all weren't on the original 4 that was selected.
We were not on the original 4, but they expanded it to 5. And originally we were cut from the original 4. I think I don't want to say who it was. Someone at the county level said, well, they don't have a use for the fuel, so let's not spend any time on them. And so we made the same proposal, actually made the proposal to them to enter into a study to find those fuel users. And so they added us to the short list of now 5 companies they're considering. And in the meantime, the city stepped in and said, listen, if we're going to look at this, let's go ahead and finance that study and get that information so we can make an informed decision. So that's the report.
Well, that's even better because, I mean, that was the question. My second question was going to be, as we discuss this, how involved have y'all been or will y'all be with the county so that if we don't have to bring in waste from other places, which y'all are saying we don't, correct?
Correct. Then
how do we coordinate that together? So that answers both of those.
Yeah, we are on the short list with them, and I can't speak for the county. They have their own decisions to make, but it's my belief if this report shows a economically viable user of the fuel, then the county would look very favorable on waste away as the county solution. But now, that's their decision to make, so I can't make it for them.
So if there's not a whole lot of examples out there, other than maybe Morrison and a potential deal you got in California, with your particular company, are there other companies that create this clean energy or whatever whatever the little acronym was, basically that we can look at to determine whether or not it's likely that we're going to be able to find users of the energy? I mean, at this point, it's all good. I like it. You just kind of got to go, well, if we're going to have to sell 3.5 times more than what you're selling in Morrison, which is going to be difficult. And if the county's putting theirs in, I assume that number gets even bigger. Is there some economic development piece of this that says, hey, look, we've seen in other areas where they sell these types of pellets, not our pellet, but some other pellet, that they've been able to bring in good jobs, industry? I mean, is there anything like that that is associated with this?
There are brokers that will market fuel like this, but by far how these projects are typically financed is you enter into a long-term agreement with a fuel user before you build the facility, and that way you remove that risk. That's why TVA is an excellent partner because a long-term contract with TVA is a financeable contract, obviously. Cement manufacturers are another excellent buyer for this fuel, and we have letters of interest from every major North American cement manufacturer. They all want this fuel. They're constantly calling us and saying, hey, this plant has a real problem. Can you develop a waste-away project close to our cement plant? One problem we have with them is cement kilns tend to be built out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody wants, just like you don't want a landfill in town, a lot of people don't want a cement kiln in town either. And so a lot of times it's hard to find fuel close enough to them to make projects work. But yes, there's markets. We can get long-term contracts with cement kilns, and there are a couple of cement kilns in Tennessee, and one of which we're well into discussions about what the numbers would look like here. So that, I expect that'll be one of the numbers we come back with in the final report, is to say, if we want to sell fuel from here to a cement kiln, then, the tip fees will be whatever that number is. Let's say, $40 or whatever.
Is there a way that we can help with the process with TVA? I mean, and I'm just thinking that if, after what happened with TVA with the coal ash in East Tennessee, is there a way regionally, if we know that this would help all the regional counties that were having to deal with these trash issues and the power plants in Gallatin, is there a way we can help with that?
Mr. Merhofer, when we met with him a couple of weeks ago, he actually suggested that TVA may want to call a meeting with some of the area players, if you will, the mayors of cities and counties that might be interested, and see if they can help build that coalition, because they're going to need enough waste to make it worth their time as well. But they need to get through this technical analysis, and so until he gets that report from his technical team saying, green lighting it, I don't think he'll move on that. But we're hoping that will happen sooner rather than later.
Where's the material produced in Morristown being used, sold? Where's it going?
Let's be real clear, it's Morrison. A lot of people say Morristown and start looking in East Tennessee for us. It's all going for test right now. Everything I can produce is going to cement kilns or power plants or other people that are wanting to certify the fuel. And so everything, if you visited the plant today, you'll see piles of fuel or in what we call super sacks, but they're large bags that fit on a crate where we can ship it out for testing. We've just got so many fuel buyers wanting testing, and of course McMinnville's a small community, so everything we produce is going out for testing right now.
How long would it take you to ramp up if you got approval from TVA tomorrow? How long would that process be for Murfreesboro or Rutherford County for there to be action that we could use?
To permit and build a plant on an aggressive timeline, which if you had a commitment from TVA you could do, you're looking at 2 years. Realistically, I mean, I'd like to promise faster, but realistically it'll be 2 years.
This would easily could be done if we got approval from TVA from the life of the landfill closing, that we could have something in place as an option B if that all got approved.
From my understanding of the life of the landfill, but it seems like every newspaper article I read that changes. So,
okay.
But yeah, that's my current understanding.
All right, any questions?
Back over to Darren. I think he's going to share some numbers.
Well, just last thing. This is more not necessarily real numbers. These are just made up numbers. I think the question is, well, it's an illustrative numbers, right? We've talked about it. Mike Webb and I have talked about the fact that this has been a process that has been around for 15, 20 years that's looking for a solution that's looking for the problem. And the problem, I think, is just now getting upon us, right, with the fact that these landfills are closing, landfill airspace in landfills across the state are it's becoming less and less airspace. They're becoming more and more unpopular. The tipping fees are going to get higher. I mean, when we talk about Middle Point closing, if we're successful in stopping Middle Point, we're talking about hauling waste to Camden, Tennessee, a 200-plus mile round trip, and paying $40, $45 a ton tipping fees. Guess who else is going to have to go to Camden? Metro Nashville. All the folks that are going to Middle Point. So I could see Camden's closure date going from 8 years, 9 years, all of a sudden it's going to be half of that because everybody's got to go to Camden. We've talked about rail transfer stations hauling garbage down to Alabama and Mississippi. Again, that may be a cheap solution, but we're just pushing that environmental issue to a different state. And ultimately, I think the economics of having a rail transfer station, we're going to have a lot of garbage. There's got to be a lot of waste in order to make those things economically viable, because those rail cars have to be fully loaded and again. So that's where too good to be true, it's just been so cheap to landfill stuff. Our current system, this is just kind of me showing where we're at. We have a moderate increase right now because we don't get any tipping fees. We just have operational expenses, minor increases each year based on, inflation. Our alternative system, say it's Camden. We're going to have a tipping fee and a hauling cost on top of our current system costs. What we're trying to do here, and the matrix that they've provided me, we're trying to find this alternative system, and like any business case, what's the breakover point? When does the alternative system 2 become more financially feasible than alternative system 1? So I've got both pro formas, and I'm plugging this number in. It's a variable of who buys it and at what price will they buy this fuel. If TVA comes in and says they'll buy this for $45 a ton, I'll tell you real quick where the breakover point is versus us having to go to Camden. That Middle Point gets their new landfill, and we're still stuck on calling it an expansion, but this new landfill that's adjacent to the existing landfill, and we continue to get free tipping fees, we're not going to find an alternative system that competes with that financially. I will say that the carbon emissions and the greenhouse gases that are diminished, there really is TVA. I know 20% of this fuel added to their Gallatin plant makes that footprint of that coal-fired steam plant, it gives it the footprint of a natural gas-fired plant. That's huge. And I know a lot of people are interested and they've already talked. I know you guys have talked to Sumner County, and I think you guys potentially are talking to Williams. I don't want to give away whatever you guys' secrets are. But, there's a lot of, if TVA hits the green light on this, that breakover point, I think, is going to be pretty close. Mike taught me something the other day. I guess in the military you have what is it? PACE. You have a preliminary plan, an alternative, a contingency, and an emergency plan. The emergency plan is, again, we're trying to work it out where if we have immediate closure of Middle Point, it's probably just as cheap to haul our garbage to Morrison, Tennessee, utilize their existing plant. If we can broker a deal with this cement kiln deal, we may have our emergency plan taken care of. That's my concern, is if we do have Middle Point closed, because I think, Russell's still here? If they told you out at Middle Point now that if they don't get this expansion or this new landfill that they're going to be done in, they're going to be 2 years. 2.5 years. That's news to me. I just heard that last week. I don't know if that's somebody, Chicken Little, sky's falling, or if it's really got 5 or 6 or 7 more years to go. But if it's 2.5 years, we got to have a contingency or an emergency plan ready to go. So I keep going, but bottom line is I've been given the numbers. I know the pro formas. I think it all boils back down to that fuel buyer. And if we can identify a fuel price that we can sell it for, we'll know when it's better to go this route versus hauling it somewhere else.
So in that particular illustration right here, is this, did you say it's just for illustration, or are the numbers somewhat close?
The numbers aren't, no, these are just for illustration. I just did this to give you guys, if you want to come to the office, I can give you a much more sophisticated look at this type of model.
Well, I guess the thing that, one of the things I'm trying to get, is it relates to just that right there, okay? And again, the number's not being correct, but, trying to get a grasp of what does the additional cost really look like to us? And even in the alternative system number 2, are we assuming that we're able to sell every pellet at a certain level of cost, or per ton? And then, what's that kind of worst case scenario? Is the worst case scenario we make the investment, build the plant, produce the pellets, and then have to send the pellets to Camden to put them in the landfill because we can't sell them?
I would say that'd be the worst case scenario, yep.
But that's possible if we can't find a buyer, or the buyer peters out.
Well, that's what killed the recycling market. You got all this stuff that you're basically recycling, you're pulling out for materials recovery where you were making money on it, and now they're all sending it to the landfills. That's why they're going out of, yeah.
For what it's worth, I think, this kind of illustration with the real numbers would be really helpful, just to give me some. I'm kind of thinking about it in terms of, is the delta $2 million? Because if the delta's $2 million, that's manageable. You can, if that's kind of the worst case scenario. If the worst case scenario is $25 million, because you had to, we're going from 11 million to 35 million because we're burning it and shipping it.
I've got some capital expenditures with debt service numbers. I've got number of employees. I can go in and change some percentages. We can sit there, Rick, and we can look at the pro forma of sending it to Camden on what is it going to cost per dollar, per mile, per semi-truckload versus, what if we only sell 50% or 70% or whatever of the fuel. We can go through all those. That's my goal, and they've delivered in large part on that. It's just so complicated, I didn't think you all would want me to go through something that exhaustive.
Look, I guess to a point, it would suffice for me to at least know that you're going into it at that level of detail, right? I don't have to see it by any means.
And I think that's where the discussion with the other mayors, the municipal mayors, that, we're not involved in the process on the RFP process so far. We're not educated to be able to go into that type of discussion that they're having. And so I think the municipal mayors have all said, and I think we're speaking for all the council members, that we're going to have to rely on whatever recommendation staff brings back, because we sure don't know what the next steps of that pro forma would be. And that's really where we're going to have to rely on them. I can say the only thing that I think from a city standpoint, Sunday morning was awful with the landfill smells, and it was not sewer, it was the landfill.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
And I don't think that the normal, I had 4 complaints from Las Casas and Milton on Sunday that we've got to figure that out first. We've got to find a place to take our trash, but unless someone's going to dig Middle Point up over the next 10 years or so, which I don't expect that going to happen, we've got to come up with some kind of alternative right now to fix the issue that we've got. And that, I don't know what that is, a council that we need to talk legislatively or how we need to do that, but it's not an issue that's getting better. It's getting, on days that they're not covering and that there is moisture and a low ceiling, you open the door 7 o'clock on Sunday morning and it would knock you down how much that smells, and I'm 3.5 miles away from the landfill. So we've got to figure that out.
Well, this is just my opinion, but covering it with soil would be a heck of a start if they would do daily soil cover. And we all know the problem out there is it's so big, there's not enough soil to cover it. So they've had permission to use some type of synthetic liner every day, and they're supposed to be covering it with soil, I guess, on the weekends. But, getting soil covering garbage would be a really good start. I know they've expended a lot of money on their gas extraction system, which we were told, would solve the issue by July of last year. That hasn't solved it. So go to the next simplest solution and start covering it with soil. And I say it's simple, but it's going to be expensive because they're going to have to import soil in from somewhere. So
I didn't mean to get off on a tangent.
yeah, I understand. We can.
Could you, and this is chasing a rabbit a little bit, but it's just a question that came to my mind. What is the opportunity to dig out landfills and use that as a...
Well, we were kind of talking about that earlier, and I think, there may be some at some point, again, if somebody will buy the fuel, it may make monetary sense to do so, but if you can't find anybody to buy the fuel.
It's just the trash, so any trash...
Right. You're going to have to convert it into something usable, and somebody's got to purchase it. And I'm going back to that Pratt and some of the things that the county's doing. They need to be developing these pro formas too. If you've got hauling it off to another landfill, or hauling it off to Alabama, Mississippi, wherever, by train, or going to a waste-away facility, and if you've got some hybrid of Pratt and some kind of anaerobic digestion unit to create gas, and you've got a dirty MRF, materials recovery facility, somebody needs to be crunching those numbers too, so that they know at a certain point, if it's alternative system number 3, you got to get into those kind of details in order to make an informed decision. Because they're going to have to find a market for all that stuff too. The gas, if you're doing an anaerobic digester or reactor, you're going to have to find somebody to buy that gas at probably a premium rate. You're going to have to find somebody that's taking the aluminums and the plastics. Anyway.
Gary, in your opinion, what is the reluctance for the end users not to want to buy the pellets? It seems like that's the key to this as far as there being demand for the end product. What's the reluctance for that?
Well, I think this is one thing I brought up. That in regulatory terms, them getting the EPA Comfort Letter in 2019, they're in their infancy with regards to that regulatory hurdle. And then you have 2020 and 2021 of COVID, and I know we all blame COVID for, everything that doesn't go our way these days, but that really did hit a wall. I think there was a lot of momentum. So I don't know that people have realized that this is a non-hazardous secondary material, a non-hazardous fuel that can be used like coal or wood. Obviously, the cement manufacturers have understood that, and they'll gobble it up if they can get something close by to do it. But a lot of folks are going away from coal and wood, and they're going to natural gas because of the greenhouse gas emissions. I know when they told me that a 20% replacement of this biomass with coal changed the footprint from a coal-fired plant to a natural gas-fired plant, and you effectively don't have to change out that system or that boiler or run that natural gas pipeline, I said, man, that's huge. I don't know that there's the coal ash. I mean, there's still an ash produced here. There's going to be an environmental issue with the ash that's produced, but I just don't think that the word's got out. Or the fact that this carbon offsets have created this negative, whatever the video said, a negative carbon footprint when you use this stuff. They think it's burning garbage. They think it's RDF. Yeah. They're going to have to go through all the federal air emissions issues. And it's burning coal, basically.
It's not to continue on this true, it's just hard to believe that what we're talking about, and with so many of the green initiatives and the clean environmental stuff that we're talking about, that there wouldn't be more demand.
I know. I mean, go ahead, Mark.
If I could speak to that a little bit, one of the things we're running, 2019 in some ways is a long time ago, and in other ways it's not that long ago. But as we're dealing with power companies like TVA, 2 years to make a decision is fast for them. And one of the things I had to do early on, there's a power company in Canada, Capital Power, that actually put this fuel in their plant. They were the first ones to use our fuel in a 800 megawatt power plant. And it took me 4 years, for some reason, to convince them, listen, you've got $1 billion asset, and I'd like for you to put my fuel in it and see what happens. They were a little bit hesitant to let me play with their $1 billion asset and see if I could break it. So power companies have moved extremely slowly with these decisions, but we've got a number of them that are getting there now. The cement companies, they can move a little faster. They're a little smaller than the power companies. They all got there quickly. So, fuel buyers 2 or 3 years from now is not going to be a problem at all. It's just we're in this interim between 2019 when we got the certifications we needed until we can really get the fuel buyers to accept the fuel.
I got one more question. How big of a user does it have to be a behind the fence kind of a user? I mean, is this, we have one right out there that kind of is going to automatically come to mind, I think, for most people in the room. The biggest place, the biggest factory here in Rutherford County that we can make a phone call.
We've identified maybe 15, something like 15 users in the county that are large enough, we believe, to be able to use the fuel.
And have you looked at conglomerate areas too that are all under the same substation to see about that opportunity, i.e. there might be 4 smaller places that would qualify?
We've talked to Middle Tennessee Electric about that, and they have some privacy issues there. They can't share that information as freely as they used to be able to.
Okay.
But we are working with them to identify some substations that might be a good fit.
But 18 on their own?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming the biggest one in the county would qualify. I mean, would it?
Talking about Nissan?
Yeah.
They have their own power plant.
Just make sure.
I just trying to avoid, and giving any advertisements, but if we can call somebody there and ask them that question, right? Well, ask them, are you reluctant? Why are you reluctant? I mean, and frankly, my kind of stomach, I felt a whole lot more comfortable when you told that most times we already have that agreement in place before you build the plant. I'm like, okay, I can go with that.
This is just me talking, and they may hit me on the head later. I don't see the waste generating electricity from I see the waste of fuel, somebody burning the fuel as really the easiest and the preferred option, because when you start talking about creating a steam generation plant to generate electricity, you're basically competing with TVA, which is the cheapest power in the nation. So you've got to go find people that are going to pay a premium for that green power, pay more than what they could get it for TVA, because they're trying to meet some corporate.
That would certainly be a reluctance, is that we think that they're going to have to pay more for their power. It's not that we can save them any money.
I don't know that, but that's my somewhat my expectation.
I would assume that the other part too, knowing that the federal guidelines that are coming across on fuel emission, like coal, that at some point that delta gets across to where you're going to have to pay so much to use coal because of your emissions or your carbon footprint, that's where that comes in to say we're going this direction. And Ronnie, I think your question's a good question. And I assume this is the case, that the coal producers are probably fighting just as hard for there not to be renewable energy because they're selling, they're already. So, I mean, it's that.
Everything's got to line up. I mean, it's
breaking that ceiling to be able to make it work.
I think the landfill airspace shutting down, the greenhouse gas emission footprints, all this environmental issues coming up. I think it's all just, again, as I said to begin with, they were a solution looking for a problem, and I think the problem's finally got here to make it a viable alternative. But again, I get my expectations up a little too high sometimes, but I think the numbers are starting to work. If we can find somebody, if TVA buys this fuel, the numbers will work.
Any other questions for Darren? Y'all, I haven't been involved behind the scenes on this, but I know how hard that Darren and his group have been working on this since I don't remember when we voted to spend the 55 or 50 some odd thousand.
I think was it July, August? July? Yeah, July of last year.
But they appreciate y'all's hard work on this because it's extremely complicated.
Yeah, important too. It's good stuff, man. It's really, really good stuff. Appreciate the work, for sure.
Thank you all for your support. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Darren. And we're expecting by our next Thursday meeting, if you could tell us how you solved the smell issue at Middle Point, that would be very, like large fans maybe, or the cans of apple scent Febreze that you've been doing at our sewer plants. So, all right, any questions for, hey, Greg, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here. Greg actually just comes to Murfreesboro so he can eat at Demas's. Any questions for Aaron for the January dashboard? All right, seeing none, you've got some beer permits in front of you. Ms. Brown?
We have several special event permits. There's 5 for Discovery Center, 4 for Charity Circle of Murfreesboro, and an event for Interfaith Dental of Nashville. All applicants have met requirements and are recommended for approval.
So moved. Second.
Motion and second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris. Aye. Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet. Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mr. Wright.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Any other business from staff? Any other business from the council? Councilmembers, can I get y'all's opinion on one thing? We've now, the planning commission, I think on the 16th is going to hear the land use plan. And we had a brief discussion on the land use plan, I think at our workshop, but I didn't realize based on meetings that I know Kurt has been contacted by several, Sean's been contacted, just the questions on this, and Greg's back there, that the land use plan does not technically have to be approved or voted on by the elected body. It's just the planning commission. And so I wanted to see what the council's opinion. I think it needs to come to the city council for us to vote on the land use plan. I think that's an important step to go through, besides the planning commission just blessing the land use plan, because we've not had a lot of discussion on that. But I wanted to see, yes, Gary?
Mayor, the last time we had a land use plan, we brought it to the council, not to actually vote on, but to comment. Because if it's voted on by council, it becomes a zoning plan, and the land use plan is not actually going to be a zoning plan. Just
Yeah, I'm just my thought, and this is what I wanted to get y'all's opinion, that I think it's great that the planning commission votes on it, but we need to have discussion as a land use plan. And if the council, or if the planning commission holds a public hearing and then they vote on it, we don't need that to be the law without us discussing it.
what we did last time is brought it to a work session, I believe, got your comments, incorporated it in, and the planning commission was adopted at the planning commission level, and then we report back to the council.
A public hearing next week, right? On the land use plan?
Yes, but they could have a public hearing, but they don't necessarily have to vote at that time. They could
Push it back.
Push it back. Vote off voting on it.
Is that?
Hey, wait a second. Did you say if the planning commission votes on it, it becomes zoning, or if the council? So the planning commission could vote on it, and it still is just a land use plan.
That is correct.
So I think it sounded like what you were saying was you didn't want the planning commission to vote on it. And I don't care about, I want the council to talk about it. I just don't know the right order.
If the planning commission votes on that after public hearing, then there is no discussion at the council level without asking them to change something and then reopen another public hearing and have to vote on it again.
That's right.
So we could have the public hearing, and then delay the vote, bring it back, which would be good, because then you'd have that input, bring it to the council for discussion.
Go back to
And
planning.
then take your comments and go back to
that's
the planning commission for the vote.
Why don't y'all just show up and speak at the public hearing?
I mean, if y'all,
Zoom in.
are y'all, I'd love to get input. I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't feel comfortable after reading a lot of that we've really discussed that very much at all as a council. But
If that's permissible to the council, then we'll hold the public hearing.
Absolutely.
Hold off on the vote and bring it for discussion to the council. And then get council's comments and go back to, after we incorporate those, then we'll report back to planning commission and ask them to vote on it.
It would be good too to do it after the public hearing, because then we could pass along what comments were made at the public hearing to the council, right? So the council would know what the public input was. Yeah.
Gary, is it charter that defines what it's just as?
Yeah, typically, we have brought it to the council for application. There's not actual vote on it, because we don't know it's a zoning.
Word is adoption. If council adopts this land use plan, then basically you've adopted a zoning plan, and nothing can be differentiated from it without a change in the zoning plan. And that has been, in the past anyway, been thought to be too restrictive. So we brought it to council. Obviously, council is one who has the purse to spend money to do things. So it's been brought to council for consideration and essentially to say, yeah, we like this, but not actually adopt it by council.
the main reason why is, y'all all knew this over the years, we get hammered anytime that we have to vary the zoning going against the land use plan, like Costco, and so it would be nice for us to discuss it and understand it, as opposed to every time that it comes up, we have to go against the zoning plan. So that.
It's okay, council, to have the public hearings, and then until we have time to bring it for discussion purposes to the mayor council. And direct us on any changes that you like, dislike, we incorporate those and take it back to the planning commission.
Is everybody okay with that?
You're going to have public comment.
And we'll bring that to you, that'll be part of the package.
That'd be great.
That'd be good. This brings up we're good with that. Everybody's good with that. That does lead me to one thing, Mr. Ives. So is this tied to this idea? And I can't ever remember which order it is, but if somebody's bringing a zoning change, they're going from a RS-15 to an RS-12, whatever. That comes through the planning commission. I know there's one public hearing or some process that we typically go through that's not actually necessary. What is that? Is that we don't actually have to have a public hearing at the council level?
I believe that that's correct, and I know that we do not have to have two public hearings, and I believe that it's council that does not have to have a second public hearing, but for years we have had public hearings, but for a zoning change, an ordinance change, then that has to be adopted by council. And the planning commission is required, I'm fairly confident, to have the public hearing as the body that recommends planning decisions, to consider it, hold the public hearing on it, and then make a recommendation to council.
So we though still would have to vote on that zoning change. We just wouldn't necessarily.
Zoning change, yes.
Yeah, like if, again, RS-15 to RS-12 goes through the planning commission, they approve it, and then comes to us. Currently, we have a public hearing, and then we, for example, approve it.
On first reading or not, and then it may change between first and second reading when it's finally adopted on second reading.
We could skip that public hearing.
I would want to verify this, but my recollection is that yes, council does not have to have a second public hearing.
All right, I'm getting to a point here. Part is, the point being that there's, kind of part of some discussion that came up in our meeting, our last planning commission meeting, where, we're trying to organize ways to get, have economic development and have, somebody coming in, looking at a project, they need to be able to move faster. I guess what I'm trying to figure out, is there a way that we can build out an expedited planning process that might take out pieces that we don't have to do when they match up to certain parameters. You know, if it's, for example, if we're going from an RS-12 to an RS-15, all right, if we're going down in zoning, you know, or I know you don't have to do that, but just I'm making an easy example here. We don't need to be having a public hearing and pushing that, you know, the time frame to publicize the public hearing at the council level after we've already gone through all that for things that are just easy. And you know, if we wanted to build out some kind of way that from an economic development standpoint, if we've got a company coming that's bringing 100 six-figure jobs, but they don't come because we got all these extra steps in our process, potentially, how can we carve that down in a way that the council would recognize as an acceptable parameter to do that, to where we don't have such a long process, is what the point that I'm getting at here is. If there are steps that exist that we don't have to do, and we'd be willing to skip those steps in certain circumstances, I'm not saying change it wholehearted, you know, all the way, that I would, you know, I think it would behoove the city and probably all of us to try to think about what those circumstances might be that we could build out an expedited planning process. When, like I said, when it's really, I mean, there's no sense in us publicizing and having these public hearings that people show up to, or that nobody's showing up to twice. That just doesn't make any sense. I mean, if nobody, can we put a parameter that if nobody shows up to the first public hearing, we're not going to have a second one. Let's just vote on it at the council. I mean, it's just, it's kind of, why do we keep delaying that for another 4 weeks of waiting until the next public hearing and scheduling it and all that? So anyway, it just seems like a way we might be able to streamline that for certain circumstances, not everything all the way necessarily.
Yeah. We'll talk with staff and identify those, and then bring it back to council. And
I would think economic development might have one, and then just, you know, if what we would all kind of just know, and I don't know the parameters, but if it's just an easy, I mean, look, like do we even do it for like a right of way? We give away a right of way, you know what I'm talking about, where we give up the easement. I mean, what the heck? We don't need to be doing that twice for sure, right? I mean, that kind of stuff. So anyway, just a thought that came up last planning commission meeting that I thought would be good for the city.
Take a look at that.
We could have public hearings for the non-controversial ones and not have.
There you go.
We'd never get another council member to serve on planning commission ever again. So, all right. Any other questions? All right. Seeing none, we'll stand adjourned. We're not meeting on Thursday night. So we're meeting on Thursday night, and I assume we will be tomorrow night. Yeah, no meeting.